Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to the fifth episode in the Swarajya webinar series, The Road to Atmanirbhar Bharat, powered by Vedanta. Today's session will dwell on the theme on how India can use its culture and soft power to propel the Indian growth story. Moderating and leading the discussion would be Shri Hari Kiran Wadla, an entrepreneur to begin with, now an activist. He's dedicated to the cause of advancing Indic cultural causes. He's also the founder and mentor of Indic Academy, a think tank that is focusing on nurturing and nourishing scholarship in Indology and shaping public intellectuals in the dharmic narrative. He also runs two renowned ventures. One is the Soft Power, which is evaluating and elaborating on the global impact of Indic spirituality, and also the Network of Indian Cultural Enterprise, an institution that brings together cultural enterprise. Joining him today is Amish Tripathi, India's bestseller author and currently the director of the Nehru Center in London. A banker to begin with, Amish had a brilliant period in writing as he penned several successful books which collectively sold 5 million copies. Over to you, gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tushar. Thank you, Swarajya, Prasanna, and Amar, and Jaggi, and team. It's nice to be back on Swarajya platform, something that personally it's been a very, very satisfying relationship over the years. I remember 2014 when we launched it, to the kind of progress that Swarajya has made. Kudos to the entire team. And thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Well, what can I say about my brother, Amish? Man, we miss you in India, but you're doing some great work for our country in London. I think I want to start with a personal question as to now this is your second career change. You're from an IIM, you had a corporate career, then you said no to the corporate career, then you become an author. And then after being a best-selling author, suddenly you said, okay, let me go to a Sarkari job and work for my country and promote my country globally. How did this second incident happen, Amish?
First, I should say I may have left my banking career behind, but I'm still I haven't left my writing career behind. I'm still very much a writer. I released, Suhail Dev, Legend of Suhail Dev, just a few months back, 6 months back. God's grace, even that has sold reasonably well. So actually, sales up to 5.5 million now. And I'm releasing a new non-fiction book in December. So I continue to write. I'm not stopping there. I see this as an addition, because essentially what do I do? I write, of our culture. I write to explain our ancient narratives, our culture, our philosophies in a more modern way, so that modern youngsters can understand it. That's what I try and do with my book, which is essentially what I have to do with the Nehru Center as well. My role out here is I am Minister of Culture at the Indian High Commission here, and director of the Nehru Center. And the idea is to spread the India narrative. And if you ask me, I think the world is ready to hear it. We just need to tell it to them in a manner that they will understand. You guys are corporate guys. You guys understand the difference between sales and marketing, right? Sales is that I have my message. I don't care what the listener wants to hear. I'm going to press the play button, just force him to listen to it, and most probably the listener may just walk away, right? Marketing is I have my message, but first I need to understand what the listener wants, and then find some connection and then through that connection deliver the message that I want to deliver. I think that's what all of us who are working in the cultural space need to learn. We need to be marketers rather than sales guys, you know. So how do we appeal? That's essentially why yoga is so big. Yoga wasn't forced through a sales method. The Americans found it attractive, and now it has become a part of their life, and we've established ownership over it. Not, royalty ownership, but everyone knows that it comes from India. So that's what marketing is. That's what we should be doing. How do we get our ancient message across in a way that the Westerners will appreciate and understand?
Thank you for that, Amish. Talking about marketing, and I want to just segue into the event that you attended, and I think you also spoke at this event last year or this year earlier in February, about which was organized by Brand Finance, and they launched the Global Soft Power Index, and I think you also spoke at that event. So can you just share your thoughts on that experience, and what are your takeaways from that?
There are various things, but if I have to say what is the key learning, the one key learning for me from that is, I know many of us think that India is portrayed negatively by Western media, by much of the elite. You come out here, you realize actually many ordinary Westerners reasonably actually think positively about India. Large part of it is because of the positive impression they have of the Indian diaspora. But the key thing that strikes you, which struck me so deeply from that report, is not whether India has a positive or a negative image. It is how ignored India is. That is the key thing. You can have a positive or negative image when you actually have an image. And especially in the mass space, for a country which has the second largest population in the world and soon to be the largest population, for a country which has the 5th largest economy in the world, bigger than the UK, for a country which on a purchasing power parity is the 3rd largest economy in the world, it's amazing how ignored we are. In that entire conference, former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon gave the keynote speech, and all top-notch guys, BBC anchors, etc. out there. I was the only Indian on stage or in the audience, right? In the report itself, India was ranked at number 27, and
Sure.
It was a very comprehensive soft power report over various factors. Probably the most comprehensive soft power report in the world. And then after the conference, I got speaking to to some of the organizers, and I was told that actually India's ranking has risen in the last few years. Matlab, we were even worse. And that to me is the key problem, that how ignored India is. So that is our first step. How do we raise our profile? Because it's far bigger problem than having a negative or positive image. Our profile itself is very low for a country of our scale.
In fact, just wanted to talk about that ranking itself. If you, there is another ranking called the Soft Power 30. And then this Brand Finance is the second ranking that is there. So there are 2 rankings for our soft power. And if you look at the definition of Joseph Nye, Joseph Nye's soft power definition, he broadly talks about political values, he talks about culture, and he talks about foreign policy. Whereas I just looked at both their criteria, and I want to share the screen with you for you to have a look to see how and where we are lacking, or what are the criteria that they're looking at. So just give me a minute. I'll share the 3 slides with you. So this is what Joseph Nye talks about. Culture, political values, and foreign policy, broadly. Now, the Soft Power 30 index has a slightly different and more expanded kind of a criteria. One is the government, then they say digital, culture, enterprise, engagement, and education. This is the objective data, and then they have a polling data wherein they ask questions to a sample. Now, the criteria that the Brand Finance conference that you attended talk about 7 pillars again: business and trade, governance, international relations, culture and heritage, media and communication, education and science, people and values. So if you see how the expansion of the criteria, now just let's reflect on this, because we are now talking about how can we use our culture as an economic resource. So if you just look at this criteria, they have expanded it to business, engagement, education, media. So there are more criteria in which these indexes are made and the rankings are made. Specifically coming to business and how we can use our culture as a means to become independent, an economic powerhouse. Can you just share your thoughts on that?
My outlook is that things, we should not confuse causality with correlation, right? Hard power is at the heart of it, right? You will find nations in history which have had hard power but no soft power. You will find nations with hard power and with soft power, but you find almost none in the reverse, where they have soft power but no hard power. That is almost impossible. That doesn't happen. The Mongol nation, for example, at the peak of the Mongol Empire, they had tremendous hard power, but very little soft power. No one in the world took up Tenkism as a religion, for example, right? So I'm not so sure that culture will lead to economic strength. Economic and military strength is actually hard power. The conversation of our soft power is different when the economic growth is 5%. It's different when the economic growth is 10%. So one of the things that we Indians have to realize at the core, there is no substitute for hard power. And we have to focus hard on economic reforms, on building up our military capabilities, and the government is working well in most of these areas. The way we have stood up to the northern invader has shown that our army has the strength to stand up. Some of the reforms that have taken place in the last few months, especially in labor and agriculture, are very welcome. And like most reforms, they are difficult to implement. Like most reforms, vested interests will get impacted. So we have to find ways to implement it. But as has been said wisely, never waste a good crisis. So it's good that economic reforms is taking place. And we have to develop economic and military strength. So therefore, why develop soft power? Soft power makes the exercise of hard power a lot more efficient. America can get a lot more done with much lesser hard power because they have soft power. Whereas China has to try much harder. They have to pay a lot more money, China, to get people to follow their way, because their soft power is not there. Soft power they had has been demolished to a large degree, in this last year.
By the way, the ranking in the Brand Finance, they have some 4 or 5, the number 4 or 5.
That's
we
true.
have to,
But that was before the COVID pandemic.
yes,
I'm
we have
just
to see, right.
Yeah, we have to see the impact of the COVID pandemic. But anecdotally, in everything that one reads, so for example, Pew surveys which come out much more regularly in terms of favorable, unfavorable rankings for China. The unfavorability rankings are the worst since when records began of Pew, since when the surveys began. It's the worst ever for China. So the pandemic has really destroyed a large part of their image. Now, whether that will impact their hard power, one doesn't know, right? It's not that people had a soft power love for Mongols or Turks, but the Mongols and Turks still won, right? So sometimes hard power can overwhelm soft power. So therefore, for us, what we Indians have to remember is soft power is not a replacement for hard power. There is no substitute for hard power. We must have it.
True, but I was referring to
Coming to soft. Sorry, go ahead.
I was referring to cultural enterprises. How can we use our cultural enterprises for economic growth? Because of the global demand that you are seeing overseas, whether it's for yoga, several things for our cuisine. As you know, we have recently set up an initiative for cultural enterprises and to create global brands called Network of Indian Cultural Enterprises. And we are looking at several segments: health and wellness, food and beverages, fashion and accessories, home decor, and experiential tourism. These are the 5 categories that we are looking at. Within these categories, how can we create global brands? So that we become that drives our economic engine. From that point of view,
very good point, because one of the things, yes, is culture leads to employment and economic growth as well, no doubt about it. Again, the US has shown that their movie industry, their mass media, etc. And India, admittedly, we are not as high profile as a country of our status should be, but it's not that we are completely unknown. So a few things have grown by their own dint. So Indian cuisine has grown a lot, for example, and there is a brand value to Indian cuisine. One of the things that's not as well known, you'll be surprised to know that most of the smaller Indian, quote unquote, Indian restaurants in London are actually owned by Bangladeshis, okay, not by Indians. The fine dining and elite restaurants are Indian restaurants are usually owned by Indians, but the mass ones are. Why don't they call it Bangladeshi cuisine? I actually asked because I've gone to some of these places, and I asked the owner this. So he said people don't walk into Bangladeshi cuisine; they'll walk into a Indian cuisine restaurant. So it shows that there is value for that. Yoga itself is value. Are we converting this into economic opportunities for India? No, not really. This has not been driven by a strategy. This has just happened organically. Right? Even yoga, let's be honest, it grew in the US organically. At least now we've established ownership of it, but it's grown organically. So what can we do in this space? We don't have the money to go across the entire world. So we have to kind of pick and choose our markets. One of the things I believe is that in the cultural space, it's the power of the Anglophone world, which is dramatic. We can't focus on the entire world. But if you see China, for example, they invest a lot of money in Hollywood movies, right? They don't invest money in French movies, which many critics would say are of a better quality, right? Because they know the power of the Anglophone world, of the English speaking, the cultural power. So why has yoga spread across the world? Basically, because let's be honest, because Americans found it cool. Then from America, it cascaded down to the rest of the world. So therefore, if we want to build the market for our cultural products, for our movies, for our dances, for our cuisine, the market that we should try and target first is the Anglophone world. The Anglophone world is essentially UK, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. right? And from there, it's a power of the Anglophone world, which will remain at least for a generation more, which will then cascade down to the rest of the world. So if our movies become hits in these countries, it'll cascade down to the rest of the world. If we have more of an impact on media, if we have more of an impact, if you can impact something on Broadway or West End, again it cascades down everywhere. So perhaps one of the strategies we should adapt, or rather adopt from the Chinese, is realizing the power of the Anglophone world and then focus here and try and. Fortunately, we have a very strong diaspora in these countries who can be partners in this enterprise.
And in terms of you were saying the media narrative has not, because in the Anglophone, in the other countries, this issue doesn't arise, but we see a lot of negative press in these parts of the world in terms of the larger mainstream media. You think that doesn't affect your experience has been that it doesn't affect the demand and the perception?
It's not that other media will not write negatively about us. DW in Germany writes negatively about women's issues in India. Most of them actually have no clue about India. Where do they get their markers from? From London media, right? So again, what I'm saying, that Anglophone media narratives cascade down. But I know we think that we get a lot of negative press in the Western media, more specifically UK and US media. But I've been living in the UK for the last 1 year. I get I get the newspapers regularly to my home, every day. So I get the Telegraph, I get the Times, I get the Guardian, I get Financial Times, I get all the major newspapers. I watch Sky, I watch BBC. I am telling you, I kid you not, I can count on my fingers how many times India was even mentioned in the newspapers. Yes, when it was mentioned, more often than not, it was negative, right? But I'm saying again, the key problem is not that it is that the coverage is negative. The key problem is that India is largely ignored, right? That's the first point. So how do we raise our profile? The second thing, let's be honest, large part of the reason, and because the cultural memes of the Anglophone world are also made largely in 4 cities: London, New York, Washington DC, and LA, right? And now San Francisco has come in over the last few years because social media narratives are also important now, and that's defined a lot by what the cultural meme complex influencers think in San Francisco. It's essentially these 5 cities, right? Washington DC because of its think tanks, LA because of the movie industry, New York because of plays, mass media, and books, London because of books, mass media, plays, and think tanks, and San Francisco because of tech companies. So these 5 cities essentially define, if you influence these 5 cities, it cascades down into the Anglophone world, and then from there cascades down to the rest of the world. How much has India done to systematically even engage with the cultural people in these 5 cities? We like to think that journalists write negatively about us, but journalists are also human beings, right? And like all human beings, they get influenced by the bubble that they live in, right? Indians and our narratives are not a part of their bubble, right? In many of these cities, I'll be honest, Pakistan has actually done a better job over the last generation. And considering what a bad product the Pakistani marketers are selling, I mean, the Pakistani state is the global terror central, right? But they have far greater influence over Western media because they're a part of their social circle. They're influencing. Our narratives don't even enter there because we're not engaging with them, either at a government level or at a private level. And this is not something that will change overnight. We have to start engaging with them, get our points of view across, listen to their criticism where we must, but at least clarify actual facts. I was shocked. I met an economist journalist who said that India invaded Kashmir. I'm like, I mean, there's criticism that that I should listen to, but this is not, the only one with a accession treaty among the three countries that claim parts of the former princely state of Jammu Kashmir is India. China doesn't have a accession treaty. Pakistan doesn't. It was Pakistan which invaded, right? And the treaty that was signed by the king of the former princely state of Jammu Kashmir was exactly the same as the treaty that was signed by over 500 other princely states. Now, the economist journalists didn't even know this. Why? Because no one has engaged with him, right? So I'm not saying that there isn't a bias. Of course, there is a bias. Now, we can take a stand that they are biased, so don't engage with them. How does that help us? Okay. Or we can take the stand that let us engage. The first people who engage, it will be very difficult for them, but we still have to do it. And this is not something that will happen in a few years. Over 10, 15 years, it will have an impact.
What about what has been your experience in the last 1 year in terms of the potential brands from India? What kind of global brands that you can see within the cultural enterprises space?
There could be products, but I won't think of, there isn't a global brand, let's be honest, at this point of time. I mean, yoga, for example, but yoga is not a brand. I mean, it's not that it's controlled by India. People at least accept.
But one would argue that you are a global brand. So there are global brands that we have produced.
That will be hubris of me to think I'm a global brand, just because there are Indians who are relatively better known in the West. But let's be honest, we are not global brands. We are Indian brands who just happen to be known, to some extent in the West. Because one of the things, I love India, I love my country, I am one of the most patriotic people in the West. But patriotism doesn't mean that we should that we should ignore our shortcomings. And one of the shortcomings, I believe, of us Indians is we get complacent very quickly. And the moment we start thinking we have any brand right now, we stop working hard. It'll take a generation more to have global brands. There are names who are well known, I admit, but is there a brand like like Robert Downey Jr. who can just put on his Twitter profile, you know who I am? And it's a statement of fact, because anywhere in the world, people know who he is, right? We don't have that.
I think we are making a small beginning. Like, for example, Priyanka Chopra is now.
Yeah, she's so, she is one of the the trailblazers. There are many, but we have a long way to go. And one of the things I like most about Priyanka Chopra, Deepak Chopra, many others, they have not become complacent. They keep working, because actually there will come a time when India will be a big brand, when many Indians will be big brands in the West. Right now, we're not at that stage yet. We have to work hard. We have to work very hard. What that also means is that we have to be conscious of, if we want to build, say, in the Anglophone market, we have to be conscious of how we think the market thinks. And then make sure we present our message in a way that they can understand. We are not at a stage where the brand is so strong that we'll say, this is who I am, take it or leave it. That may not work. So we should be true to who we are. We shouldn't pretend to be something we are not. But we also have to present the message in a way that Westerners can actually understand it. So in the cultural space.
In terms of wellness and well-being is a very big space that you already experienced. Do you see how do you see that in Europe and UK in terms of the potential for Ayurveda, and have you noticed any
It's growing. Ayurveda can grow along with yoga, but as of now, it's still not big. But I think the potential is huge because of COVID. I think COVID to many people across will bring the limitations of a curative approach. There are some times that if you had a bad accident, I mean, you need a surgery, you need a curative approach. But and Ayurveda does surgery well as well. But for preventive care, there is nothing like Ayurveda, which will actually strengthen your immunity. So many of us Indians in the UK, we are following our traditional techniques, to keep our immunity strong. Haldi doodh in the night, and kadha and amla, all the standard things, to keep our immunity strong. So I think there is an opportunity here, and we need to capitalize on it. We need to build on it. I'm trying to work on a program. There is a trust which Prince Charles has set up, BAT. And from what I have come to know, Prince Charles is apparently extremely interested in Ayurveda, and he's a believer.
He comes to Bangalore to Saukya. There's a place called Saukya.
Yeah. So so we have influencers, and can be a bigger influencer than Prince Charles in the UK, but we have influencers who are interested in this. So we need to start building it. This is an opportunity, and I think we'll actually help the world because look, Ayurveda is not just economically cheaper; it also causes less dissonance in your body, right? There are times when you need curative, when you need antibiotics. There could be times, but we all know the side effects of that are often as bad, if not worse, than the disease. Whereas Ayurveda is good in that sense because it doesn't lead to side effects. It's natural, so we can truly promote and market this.
And also craft. Also, there is a big movement against. What they call as the trend is conscious capitalism. So they want to use sustainable products. So more like Fab India kind of enterprises are also coming up.
True. India has the heritage to service this. So and the history, where we got to keep marketing that we are the only pre-Bronze Age culture that is still alive. So we carry techniques that go back really to the dawn of human civilization, a lot of which are deeply in tune with nature. Because in the ancient Indian way, Mother Nature is not a resource to be exploited. It's she's a goddess to be worshipped. So which informs the way we approach nature. And all products that we use, certainly that can be used to promote such products in the West.
And of course, now because of COVID, we don't have any tourism. But eventually, post-COVID, this experiential tourism would also be a big opportunity to create.
Certainly will be. There are challenges at this point of time, and right now the new strain of the virus that's come up in the UK has really made a lot of people scared. There was hope that things would come back to normal by April, May. Now it looks like it may take a lot longer. But yes, and we'll not be stuck in this forever. So there is a time when it will come back. But will there be permanent lifestyle changes, because so many people have just got used to an online engagement? So how do we build our engagement in the online space as well? For example, just off the top of my head, in the gaming world, what are we doing? There is such an influential So many people actually absorb messaging gaming now, youngsters, right? Theaters, will they ever go back to their peak? So is the age of the star-driven massive movie, is that in jeopardy now? And will it be only streaming? And in streaming, it's a different atmosphere. It's driven more by stories, right? But so what can we do on the online space as well? Because a lot of I have a sense that there will be experiential tourism, physical tourism. It will come back. But will it come back to the peaks that it was? I don't know. Will people's attitudes themselves change when they get used to this? It takes 40 days, right, for new habits to form. People have been stuck in this for much longer. And if they get stuck in this for a year or more, many people have got used to the convenience of online. So we'll have to have a mix of both. That's my point.
Great. Thank you very much for your insights. Any last words on what you see in terms of our cultural enterprises and how they can grow?
I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I'm not just saying that because I'm a patriotic Indian, but we have only just begun showcasing our culture and heritage. We've only just begun. We Indians ourselves have started rediscovering our I'm saying at an influential level only over the last few decades, because we are emerging once again after a few centuries of decline and invasions. So I think the next 20-25 years is going to be very exciting. You will find Indian storytelling styles, Indian books, Indian movies, Indian fabrics, Indian medicine system, Indian tourism, Indian architecture styles. I believe that you'll see it spreading all over the world once again, just as it did in the first millennium of the Common Era, when Indian culture had spread to so many parts of the world: Southeast Asia, China, Japan, Central Asia, Middle East. I feel we are at the beginning of such a process once again. I will caution that we Indians have a very bad habit of becoming complacent. We shouldn't become complacent. We shouldn't assume that this is going to happen. We all of us have to work very hard for it. But we can certainly make those achievements and make our ancestors proud.
Thank you so much, Amish. On that note, let's hope our path to economic progress is our culture also contributes to our economic progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you.